Take a big ol' drag of coffee. Nice. Oh, hey, CNFers, it's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. And wouldn't you know, this podcast shares a promotional sponsorship with the 2026 Power of Narrative Conference taking place March 27th and March 28th in lovely Boston, Massachusetts. This year's keynote speakers include Ken Burns, Patrick Radden Keefe, Angela Patton and Natalie Ray, Sarah Stillman, and Asma Khalid. There's a handful of CNF pod alums on the total roster, so you're going to really want to take advantage. If you use the promo code NARRATIVE20 at checkout, you get 20% off your fee. That's some serious cheddar. Visit calmbeyond.bu.edu to register. Repairing, restoring, reconnecting through true storytelling.
Yeah, it really matters to me. And I get that genre is like an invention and it's historically specific and this, that, and the other. But I mean, I think we're actually seeing the fallout of fabricating in our democracy.
Oh, hey, CNFers, it's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. I'm your normie host, Brendan O'Mara. Hey. It's a little later than planned. It's okay, though. But here we are, featuring Mary Margaret Alvarado's piece for the Atavist Magazine, titled, That's Somebody's Son. 3 mothers, 1 struggle, saving their children with schizophrenia. Heavy piece. Great piece, naturally. It's a piece that Mia, as Mary Margaret goes by, pitched more than a year ago, and it was rejected by Seyward Darby. But Mia went back to the drawing board, basically wrote the entire thing, reported the entire thing, and came back to Seyward. And boom, here we are. This podcast is sponsored by the newsletter Pitch Club, the monthly Substack where you read cold pitches and hear the authors audio annotating their thinking behind how they sold and crafted their pitches, how to pitch an agent, an editor, a feature, an essay, a source. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com, forever free. Read a little, listen a little, learn a lot. We're going to hear from the the editor-in-chief, LOL, Seyward Darby, about her side of the table and why this piece was at first rejected and that special feeling when a great pitch comes across the transom. I'll give Mia more of an intro when we reach her part of the conversation, but for now, here's Seyward Darby. Cue up the riff. Huh.
Well, I'm no fun. I want to be fun. I want people to think that I'm fun. I think I'm fun, but I don't write about fun stuff.
I didn't get a dongle. I'm really sorry.
Don't at me.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
Like, what's the feeling like? You're scanning your inboxes for pitches and you're reading them and you're like, and then you come across one that is like really popped. You're like, oh wow, like that could be a good fit. Like, what's that like when you come across those?
I mean, it's exciting, right? It's like an adrenaline rush, essentially, when, I feel really excited about something. But it's funny you asked that about this particular story or in the context of this particular story, because she pitched me maybe a year or so ago, and I rejected it. This story, I rejected it because at that point it was just an idea and it was really hard in the abstract to understand how it was going to come together. Like, I thought it was a great idea. She and I went back and forth quite a bit, if I recall, but it was just one of those pieces where it was like, this is going to entirely come down to the writing and the execution in a way that, if a piece is really deeply reported and has like really obvious narrative contours, you can assign and say, cool, now, go report and draft it. Because I know that absolute worst case scenario, like I could put it together, right? Like somebody could deliver a draft and if it's not working, whatever, like I know what the story is, I can put it together. This is an example of a story where it really, really, really came down to whether or not the writer had a vision for it and could write it. And I told her, I was like, I'm really sorry. Like, it's just one of those things. Like, I kind of need to read the story to know. And she was like, no problem. And then, lo and behold, a year later, she sent me a draft and it was so good. And this was the thing, like she could pull it off. Like she's a really good writer. She had a very specific vision for how she wanted the piece to feel. And it was just so obvious on the page. And I remember shared it with Jonah, and he and I both were like, man, this is a really special piece. And kind of the ideal situation where you're like, I really like this idea, but I don't know if somebody's going to pull it off. And then she pulled it off and then some. Not exactly the scenario you're asking about, because this was, an instance where I was like, I really like it. I just don't know if it's going to work. And then I think it was the kind of story that was just important enough to her that she felt like I have to write it. And she did. And it's so, so wonderful. Devastating, obviously, but also so wonderful and couldn't have been written by anybody else. That's the other thing, right? Like you're reading this story and you're like, you need somebody who is so close to this story, and so close to these people. And I think she killed it. She nailed it.
Yeah, and this story batted leadoff in the Sunday Long Reads newsletter, the aggregation of all those great long read stories that Don Van Atta and Jacob Feldman put together. Mm-hmm. And I saw you had posted on social just that this is one of the best stories that you've ever worked on at the Atavist. Like, what was it about it that really made you come to that summation of it?
Yeah, look, it's in some ways an unusual story for us, because like I said, the narrative contours are not obvious, right? Like the beats of the story, it would be a very difficult story to like storyboard or outline, right? It's so intimate. It's so closely observed on these three women. And then, the slightly wider lens of their families. But I think what's so special about it, and the Sunday Long Reads said this, you really do kind of feel like you're holding your breath while reading this story, because you're so immediately drawn in to this world and into like the struggles that these people are going through, and you so badly want them to be okay, right? And I think that Mia, goes by Mary Margaret as her byline, but she is Mia. Mia, just did this amazing job of making these scenes. Only, I think there's only one, maybe two scenes that she actually witnessed. Everything else is reconstructed. And yet she manages to make you feel like you are watching it happen. And, it's in case after case, like quite frankly, a life or death situation, right? Because, if somebody's going through psychosis, you just really don't know what's going to happen on the other side. And so I feel like this story it's one of the most closely observed stories I've ever worked on. And I think that makes it exceptional. But then it just has so much heart, like it has so much, I don't know, it's just the depth of feeling and compassion and empathy is pretty rare, honestly, that somebody can achieve that in writing. They might be feeling it, but then to be able to achieve it in writing, and like the scene, and I obviously want everybody to go read the story, and I don't want to give anything away, but there's an exceptional scene where one of the mothers filmed her child in a state of psychosis and did it out of desperation. Like I just, it's so hard to describe what it's like when you are dealing with someone in psychosis. And it was like, well, let me videotape this, not videotape it, but on your phone to show somebody like, this is what it looks like. And that scene is, I'll never, ever, ever forget it. And every time I read it, which was, dozens of times over the course of editing it, I always just felt myself so, like, my heart was just like cracking open every single time. And I think part of it, I will also say, is, I became a mom a year ago. And this is a story very much about mothering. And I think Mia, who is also a mother of 4, I believe, her ability to convey the unconditional love that a parent has for a child, no matter what the circumstances are, it just shines through in the story. So yeah. And I think it's one of those, it's already a story that we've gotten so many nice notices from readers about what it meant to them. And, for instance, a woman I went to college with who, we kind of loosely follow each other on social media, but she sent me a long note on Instagram to tell me my sister took her own life a year ago. And it's something that I haven't been able to really talk about publicly, but stories like this, like, I don't know, make me feel like there's a place for there to be a conversation, like that kind of stuff. And I just knew working on the story with Mia that it would be that kind of piece, that on the other side, people would be responding to it in this deeply, deeply personal way. And I was actually texting with Evan Ratliff, who founded the Atavist, about it. And he pointed out, he was like, I think that everybody probably knows somebody who has either, dealt with really profound mental illness themselves, or, somebody who knows somebody. And I think there's this sort of universality to the story where people can say, oh, that is exactly what it's like to watch someone struggle, to wish you could help, not know how. And I think it's quietly its own, like the piece is so, again, intimate is the word that keeps coming to mind. But at the same time, it's a pretty quiet but powerful call for action, right? When I say that, I mean, to reform mental health care, but also to sort of revolutionize the way we think about people who have profound mental illness. And I think that Mia does a really beautiful job at various points, particularly right near the end, of, saying, like, that's ultimately, like, these mothers want their children to have rich, full lives, but maybe that doesn't meet the definition of what, we as a culture mean by a rich, full life. And so what if we're wrong? And what if, we need to sort of reassess and redefine things? Anyway, I could go on and on. I think this piece has a tremendous amount of heart while also being really uniquely, beautifully written. Yeah. And I think that's the other thing is, like, you're just like, oh, like, I will always be like, oh, Mia Alvarado wrote that piece, like that is her voice very distinctly on the page.
Yeah. And with her piece, given that it was initially turned down, but then comes back to you a year later, essentially fully formed, what was the, your eye approaching it, and what did you see in it, and what are the challenges that you saw from your side of the table to make it its best possible version?
I think there was a balance I wanted to strike between keeping Mia's style, absolutely, and sort of, again, quiet intimacy, while also making sure that it felt like there was narrative propulsion to the story. I think that we achieved that by, opening with a tragedy. Like, I'm not giving anything away. It's, the first paragraph. And then setting up that the question becomes what happened, right? Not what is going to happen. Where does this end? Because where it ends. It's more a matter of, well, what happened to lead to that? And so we sort of restructured a bit because originally, if I recall correctly, there was more of Ben's story near the front of the piece. And we sort of moved a big chunk of that toward the latter half of the piece because it felt like something we wanted to work up to, the revelation of everything that happened. And then the other thing was figuring out how to signal when the women's stories intersected. Because the way it was pitched to me originally, even before I got the full draft from her, was there are these three mothers. They each have children with profound mental illness, ultimately diagnosed as having schizophrenia. And they have formed a sort of safety net for each other that society, the medical system, et cetera, doesn't provide. What's interesting is, like, that happens a few times in a literal sense, right? Where somebody does something for someone else that really makes a difference. And like Tracy, putting in a call, or Elizabeth putting in a call, or, whatever, something that happens that, really helps in a given moment. But then it's also just the emotional safety net. And I think that one of the things we worked on was figuring out how to bring a little bit more of those moments of connection among the women into the piece. They were sort of there, but that was one thing that we worked on in editing. So yeah, it was very much a balance, I think, because you have 3 stories. You want to make sure you're giving them all the weight they need and deserve, while also showing why you're telling 3 stories together. Mm-hmm. And so finding those points of connection and, really making sure they land, they feel important. And then, and ultimately you realize at a certain point, you want everyone to be okay. That's the most important thing. You're like, I just want everyone in this story to be okay. And the question is, will they, with the exception of the one person who's not okay from the opening of the piece? And then it's like, well, what happened to lead to that? It's funny you say challenges, and like there are obviously like always challenges, but with a piece like this especially, it was like, everything's here, or I know you have everything that we need. And it's figuring out how to make sure we're putting everything in its correct place, like in the place where it's going to have the most impact. Because I think too, it's a hard piece to read, right? Like it's really intense, and you want it to feel the whole time as if somebody wants to keep reading, because there's both the question of what happened, but also you want there to be love and joy and, enough to come through that it doesn't feel so heavy. It doesn't feel so dark. And I think that's the other thing that Mia does a really lovely job of is, these moments of joy or beauty, no matter how small. And I think she does particularly the scene where Mia goes with Felicia to visit Quentin in the facility that he's in for quite a while. And just like their interactions sitting there, and it's, you can tell, Mia says this, how much they love each other, and also how even just like the littlest things can feel like victories. A good day is a victory. And she does a really great job. Mia does a really great job of conveying those moments of joy. So yeah, so this is all to say it was about balance, right? About knowing what the piece wanted to say, how it wanted to say it, but then like, okay, well, where do we inject these moments of connection, these moments of joy, these moments of revelation, so that it feels cohesive?
Yeah, the problem you can run into with pieces that might come in, full draft on spec, is that you're painted into various corners. And so maybe it can be a bit of a challenge to rearrange those pieces. To what extent do you like seeing whole drafts versus something that can be more moldable from the early goings?
It's a great question. I never mind seeing a full draft. The way that I always sort of approach a full draft with someone is before I agree to assign it. If I feel like I see potential, if I feel like I see what the Atavist version of the story would be, is I kind of tell them, here's what I want to do. Is that okay with you? Is that going to work for you? Because I would never assign a piece like, hey, great draft, like, let's get going. And then you get into it and you realize like, oh, our visions are actually just not going to align because you've written this, you're kind of done. Like, this is what you want it to be. And so like in this case, I remember I had a call with Mia around Thanksgiving and said, I'd really like to move some of the Ben material later in the piece. I'd like to show a few more moments of connection among the mothers. Like, how does this sound to you? And we also talked about, this piece in particular is one of those that is really sensitive from a fact-checking standpoint. You're going to be, talking to people about some of the worst days of their lives and about really, really intimate stuff. And like, how are they going to take to that? Do you think that they'll be okay with that? Any number of things. And so kind of ticking off those boxes of like, can we make this work is always really important with full drafts. The problem, you're absolutely right, with full drafts sometimes is that, again, it's kind of done, right? And somebody says, well, I finished it and this is what it is. And particularly at the Atavist, we have this thing that we do, which is narrative nonfiction specifically. And so it's like sometimes somebody will turn in a really cool draft that feels like you're kind of giving away the whole story up front. And like, it's more of a traditional feature, for instance, or, it's more issue based, or, more of a profile a traditional profile, and traditional, I do not mean in a pejorative sense at all. Just, it's different than what we do. And so the question is always, would you be willing to reconfigure it for the Atavist? Oftentimes the answer is yes, but sometimes people are like, no, that's not what I'm interested in. Which, fine, no problem, take it elsewhere. But I never ever mind seeing a draft. That being said, I never want people to, because writing is hard. And if you're writing on spec, you're not getting paid, and that's hard. And so I never want somebody to feel like they have to write a draft for it to be assigned. So in this case with Mia, I said, I totally see potential here. I just can't, it's really hard in the abstract, having never worked with her, not knowing her style, any number of things to assign and hope it works out. Right. It was please pitch somewhere else that, maybe would feel more comfortable, kind of taking a leap on this kind of essay. And so she came back to me of her own accord. That's all to say, I never want people to feel like, well, I guess I got to go write this to see if they actually want it. That's not the intention. If I feel like I can't quite see it without seeing a draft, I'm always going to say, you're welcome to come back, but please pitch it somewhere else too, if you want. Because the most important thing is getting published and paid.
Sweet. Okay, so next we have Mia, who goes by Mary Margaret Alvarado in her byline. She's a multifaceted writer, with her poetry and nonfiction appearing in the Iowa Review, the Kenyon Review, VQR, Outside, the Georgia Review, among other publications. She is the author of the poetry collection Hey Folly and the nonfiction chapbook American Weather. She lives in Colorado. In our chat, we talk about dogged obsessiveness, cold drafts, ambition, trust, reimagining the MFA, and stalking produce. Great stuff. Hope you'll stick around for a parting shot on the bullet train to Bummerville, but for now, here's Mia. Huh. Writers, being the insecure lot that we are, we're always searching for some measure of good advice and good counsel for how it is we go about the work, however we may do it. So for you, Mia, just what's some good advice that maybe you've received that's been helpful, or just hard-earned advice that you live by that maybe sometimes you offer to someone else who needs it?
I mean, my something that's helped me a lot the last decade now is, if you want to be hopeful, do hopeful things. I've been using that a lot myself here in the hard times. Writing advice. I mean, a certain sort of dogged obsessiveness seems to help. That's not really anyone's particular words to me. I definitely remember hearing Tobias Wolfe speak once and just making the point that many writers make, that talent is wonderful and widely distributed on earth, but sitting down and putting in the hours is where it's at. Yeah, that's huge to me. When I've taught writing, I often think more in terms of more tangible art forms. I used to play violin really seriously. I used to pay my rent by throwing pots. So for me, when I'm trying to relay writing advice to other people, I often try to think of more physical art forms that allow you to really sort of know when something is right and working.
Throwing pots. What is that? Am I missing something? That went over my head.
Right. It sounds like you get to throw them at the wall. America's new sport. That's just what it's called when you throw clay on a pottery wheel.
Okay.
Yeah. So mugs and bowls and vases and stuff.
Gotcha.
But with clay, it's very easy to tell, I have an air bubble, or it's off center, or there's a wobble, or it's too wet. Kind of material things that are sort of harder to get at when you're dealing in a more abstract art form.
Gotcha. Yeah, yesterday I was feeling really crummy, so instead of doing something maladaptive, which was my my go-to thing, is just why don't I get a 6-pack of strong beer and drown my sorrows? I actually just just made a collage I've been meaning to make, and so it was some collage therapy. So that tactile thing, that
absolutely
worked.
good for you. Good.
Yeah.
And then you can have a beer, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Have a beer and have some glue and paper and scissors and make
Perfect. Just
something
don't
good.
huff the glue. Yeah. There you go.
And I understand after talking with Seyward that at first you had pitched this story and it was rejected initially. And then you
Yep.
eventually come back to it with a more fully fleshed out draft. So just take us back to the conception of the piece and, how you were thinking of it then, the rejection of it, but then still staying with it.
Yeah, it's the only time in my life that I've, I really don't like the phrase circled back, but circled back to an editor after a rejection. I knew that I thought the Atavist would be a great place for this essay. And I had pitched it, and Seyward had given me, you get lots of different rejections in life. And it was clearly a very open and complimentary one. It was not a closed door. So then I got completely and totally stuck on the essay. I didn't look at it for a year. And then I saw a deadline for a long form contest, which I didn't actually end up entering, but it motivated me to just finish it. I finished it, and then I pitched it to her, and then she took it pretty quickly second time around. My husband doesn't usually use this word, but he said that was ballsy to go back to a rejection. But yeah, a lot of it was figuring out some difficulties around characterization, basically, is the sort of short version of it.
Well, the fact that a contest made you, it stirred up the leaves for you to go back to it again. That's happened to me before as well, where I had this thing that I couldn't land it anywhere, and then there was a contest call, and and I submitted it to that or whatever. But it just goes to show the degree of how there's really never a wasted word, how maybe a thing that you're working on, it might just not be the right time for it yet. And
Absolutely.
so there's really a lesson to be learned there of just just maybe it's not yet for this thing. Don't waste it.
Oh, timing is huge. And I love, it's hard to do, but I love when a draft gets so cold that I can read it like it's not my own work. And it had gotten that cold. So then I could be perhaps bolder in my revisions. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love the idea of letting it get, truly letting it get cold. Cold to the touch, to the point, to your point of almost not recognizing it because you're like, oh wow, but there is some little glimmer of who you were at that point. Oh, I can still see me in that thing, but maybe I'm a little bit better, or I did a little more research, or you can come at it fresh, but it's a bit more developed, so maybe the lift doesn't feel as heavy.
Yeah, and I used to do that. I write different genres, and when I was writing poetry a lot, I used to physically cut out poems I was stuck on, and I had more time in my life at this point, but and I'd put them in other people's books of poems so that I'd happen upon them like they weren't my own writing. So all kinds of ways of sort of tricking yourself into bold revision. Yeah.
And what do you remember about your initial pitch to the Atavist for the story?
It was just kind of a classic pitch of here's, 3 quick paragraphs. What's the whole story distilled? Who am I? Why does it matter? And it was a good pitch. It was a good pitch. And I didn't pitch it that widely, but Seyward did say to the second time around that she has started getting a lot of pitches from bots and AI made pitches.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So she was, she'd been a little bit slogged down just trying to weed through what is actually human made work.
Well, you talk about dogged obsessiveness, and I imagine that was part of your animating force to pursue the story. You have a personal tether to the story as well. So, what was the obsessiveness that made you be like, this is a story that I need to write. I need to see through.
Yeah, this was a little different for me than other writing. I mean, I'm obsessive about writing, period. And I don't know how anyone writes unless it's internally motivating for that person. I don't know how you could sustain it otherwise. But actually, Tracy originally asked me to write the story. And I just thought, oh my God, she's, been through hell. If I agree to this, I can't not do it. So there was a really deep ethical commitment once people trust you with those intimacies. to bring it to life. Yeah.
So you are in touch with Tracy to start doing the research and the reporting. So like, how do you start building out from there? So it ends up not being about one person, but this triumvirate of women dealing of mothers dealing with this severe mental health issue at the core of it.
Yeah, I didn't want anything so on the nose in the actual essay, but when I was first conceiving of it, it was just kind of uncanny. 3 kids all welcomed as sons, same part of the world, with very different, 2 blended families, Black and white, queer and straight, people who are more enfranchised, people who are coming into enfranchisement. It was just in terms of kind of factors to sort of illuminate this one question. It was uncanny. And you do see, I mean, Rob Reiner's family has been in the press recently that schizophrenia is such a difficult condition for folks and for caretakers that even in the highest levels of wealth and access, it can be devastating. So I was thinking about all those things. And then actually I tend to be the sort of writer who, when I'm not kind of doing front burner on one project, I usually have multiple projects that I'm working on. So I was actually on submission with my novel, and I just threw myself into interviewing because it was a wonderful way to I go back to nonfiction the most often of different genres because it's the most workmanlike to me. And I can just put in the hours and then it gets done. So I just interviewed, and I probably have 12 times the material than what's in the essay. There's stories upon stories. So this was certainly the kind of craft work that, among other things, was just sort of asking what should be included.
Yeah, what is the calculus you're undergoing to make those decisions about what stays in and what has to get cut, even if the stuff that gets cut is pretty rich?
Yeah. Well, some of it was ethical with this story. People told me some, there's very hard things in the story. People told me some things that were so intimate that I knew they would not want them printed. So I was being careful to protect folks was part of it. And then, of course, I'm just trying to write third-person nonfiction. I love that the Atavist describes it as a kind of filmic nonfiction. And if you think of writers like Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc, it's very much informed by the conventions of fiction of what is the telling detail. So if I have 10 details, what are the 1 or 2 that really bring into relief this moment or this question or that sort of thing?
Yeah, and given that the topic that you're covering here is so sensitive, how did you approach the reporting and the interviewing of your central figures, so you handled that delicately?
Well, we built relationships over time. Obviously, my sister, I know her well. And actually, interestingly enough, she's been in another long form essay I wrote. So she's already had the experience of being fact checked and things. So that was easy with her. And she and I have a kind of funny dynamic where it's beautiful. She trusts me with her stories just because I do obsessively catalog and notice things. So sometimes she'll ask me things from the past. In terms of Felicia and Tracy, they're now friends. I just babysat Felicia's grandkids a weekend ago. So it was just cumulative and interviewing them in different places and different settings, in their homes, in the cars, workplaces, hanging out with them in certain spots.
What is the challenge, be it for this piece or others, of building trust with, the people who are integral to your stories that you're reporting on?
Well, I try to be very trustworthy. I probably err more on the side of transparency than editors would say you should. I have an MFA and I have broken ranks with some writers I love who think in nonfiction you can fabricate or invent to make this story work. And I disagree with that. I think when you're writing someone's life, you have to have a real humility and an allegiance to what is. I do that. And regarding some of the sort of difficult things that I didn't write, I told people I'm not writing that. I showed them a lot, to the point that it maybe made it way more difficult for me, but I showed them things. Yeah, so I try to be trustworthy. I try to be just a good friend generally, and the sort of person that keeps confidences. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, several years ago now that book Lifespan of a Fact came out,
Yes.
and it was just the writer was just being like, to him, whatever the height of the building, whatever the footage was, it didn't roll off the tongue the way he was. He just like made up a number that sounded better on the page or on the ear, and it's just like, for some people, be like, who cares? But I care. I care if it's like 1,341 feet. I don't care how much it rolls off your tongue. I want that concrete fact. That matters to me, and it sounds like something like that matters to you too. That's a liberty that you're not willing to take.
Yeah, it really matters to me. And I get that genre is like an invention and it's historically specific and this, that, and the other. But I mean, I think we're actually seeing the fallout of fabricating in our democracy. And I don't think you should do it. If you want to dream a story that's inspired by life, great. There's the whole world of fiction, including autofiction. And there's a real case for that. And I love it. But yeah, if I'm going to write about the death of someone's child, and I've seen people fabricate things that are as serious as that, it doesn't matter if it seems better if I set it in this place or this season or something. You don't get to do that, is my own feeling.
Yeah, it seemed very disrespectful to the people at the core of the story. Be like, this doesn't quite feel artistic enough, so I'm going to fabricate maybe your destiny a little bit. Your name doesn't roll off. I'm going to change. I'm going to just like change the syllabic nature of someone's name or something. Changing names is one thing for privacy things like that. That I think is fair game, especially if you don't have certain people's permission, and you want to use a pseudonym. Like I think that's fair game. But yeah, to your point, like if you're just gonna fudge the facts because it sounds more artistic, like you're just spitting in the face of the people who entrusted you with their story.
Right. And I always find it like moving and humbling to work with a fact checker. I used to work for Harper's right out of college, and I worked on the Index. So I learned a certain sort of fact checking there. But it's always like moving and humbling that you think you've got something pinned down and you're like, actually, that was correct 3 years ago and no longer is. I find that kind of beautiful. And to me, it's also a formal restraint. And in writing, I love formal restraints. I find that pushing against them, whatever the genre, it's creatively generative for me. So in nonfiction, facts can be that.
And I love that you've brought up the fact check a couple times. And I wanted to get your experience of, especially with this piece, because you're bringing up very, raw, emotive moments with your key sources. And that's kind of picking at the scab, once or twice or several times, just you and them, and then they're subjected to a fact check on top of that. So just how are you thinking about that, and even telling them, be like, yeah, you're telling me this again, and it's going to come back around to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think in all honesty, it was re-traumatizing. I don't use that lightly, but so Tracy, and she would be fine with me sharing this, she asked me to write it, and she's pleased with it now. But I think somewhere in the middle of it, when I was going over questions again, and then she was talking to the fact checker, I think it was just like, this is too much. I need to stop thinking about this. And then she dug into her own, archives is maybe too formal of a word, but things she'd forgotten about on her phone and in her email, and all this stuff came back. And I think it's very normal with great loss and grief to kind of build a little wall in your head. And she had done that. So to go back there was painful. It's been painful for all of them. I did, I was so proud of Felicia the first time, and this is very tender, of course, the first time she talked about what happened to her as a child, she used the euphemism sexual assault, which is customary in reporting. And then part of her own healing work was saying rape. It was rape. And I ran that by her a couple of times, which obviously is a painful thing to run by someone. And she said, I want to tell the truth. And part of this kind of beautiful movement of the shame is not on me. Yeah, so it was hard. But I think everyone feels better if they know, like, we're going to be really truthful and accurate and careful.
And when I was talking with Seyward, she was, particularly struck by how you were able to reconstruct scenes of which you weren't there to like witness firsthand. So for a lot of people out there who might not have that the firsthand on the ground reporting, how best can people reconstruct scenes so they are vivid, even if we're not there to physically witness something?
Yeah, so I used, a full gamut of tools, and two of the Quentin and Luke. I've spent a lot of time with Luke, obviously, and Quentin as well. But yes, I never met Ben Nassim, so it helped a lot that Tracy has a ton of material, all the bills, all the photos, all the internet footprint, the film on her phone, and then I just spoke to her over and over again. Yeah, and just what I was saying earlier, I was trying to use a storyteller's tools, as in fiction, how to make a scene. But there's worlds upon worlds of this story. I didn't interview. I kept it so focused on the mothers that a number of siblings I didn't interview. There would have been a whole other way to tell the story. That's like, what was your perception of what was happening in the basement that day? So it helped me too to have this focus on the mothers.
What becomes the ethical quandary of reporting on mental illness and people with mental illness?
Yes, I think the dictum "Nothing About Us Without Us" is huge. It's from the disability rights movement. I think Esme Wei-Jun Wang's book is the most beautiful example of that in schizophrenia that I've read recently, and I read a lot of books about schizophrenia that were very much in the background of my thinking about this. I think that dictum also applies to caretakers who are living it. And the clearest example is with this condition of not knowing you're ill while you're ill, because there is a real tension within the world of doing mental health holds about, should this person have freedom and autonomy? She says she doesn't want to be held. Should we respect that? And then, parents and caretakers who are saying this person doesn't know time or place and needs an intervention. And I will say, and I didn't write about this in the essay, but I've had very serious depression in my life, and I've had suicidal depression. And I would say, I've actually said this to my husband, and I'm saying this now because I don't think there should be any shame about all of this either, that were I to be in that place ever again, a bare minimum act of like caretaking for me that I would want is for other people to make decisions on my behalf. So my own experience of that certainly informs my writing.
Sure. And that not knowing you're ill while you're ill, isn't the name for that, is it like enos? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Can you pronounce it for me?
Well, I mean, I always go with the fast and with confidence. I've heard people say it other ways, but anosognosia is the most,
good. Yeah. So, there's a whole... I coincidentally was copy editing a book for a client about, it was a prescriptive memoir that had her son died by suicide and profound mental illness, and this word was very much key. This ambiguous loss and this that condition of not knowing you're ill when you're ill, and that the degree to which people can be, let's say, safely institutionalized or locked up in jail, and all these sort of weird, murky territory of trying to get people the protection and the care they need, but the system is such that it doesn't allow for it. It's really tricky and so hard on the caretakers.
So hard on the caretakers. I mean, there's a lot of divorce. There's a lot of comorbidities for caretakers. There's a lot of illness. Yeah, it really exacts a toll. And you're right to bring up the prison system. I actually teach in prison now, and that is, of course, the largest mental health care system we have in the United States, if you just think in terms of numbers and service, but which, of course, it should not be. Yeah, it's a big question.
Yeah, and there's a moment in the piece too where you write, and it's kind of a bigger graph, but this also kind of just lay out the privilege that more or less it was pretty much like, your sister's family was operating under it. And then you were like, now imagine trying to get care for a child with serious mental illness. If you have a job with no paid time off, if you're intimidated by doctors, live in your car, don't speak English, or if you're just too damn tired.
Mhm.
And here you see, like, if the conditions are perfect, it's hard. But
Mhm.
what if, that laundry list of concerns, any one of those would make it almost, it's just incredibly difficult, exponentially difficult to care for people. And you can see how people will maybe fall by the wayside.
Oh, absolutely. And that list actually was something that got edited. It was much longer, but yeah, I was really on a roll. But yeah, I love this adage from Peter Morin, which is like a world where it's easier for people to be good, and Dorothy Day. And I love thinking about that. Like, how could we design? What could public policy look like? What would the whole world look like if we just made it easier for people to be good? And, it's across the board in our society. Like, you think of the number of women who give birth and they work at a place like Walmart and they have to be back. They have to be back. They don't have leave. Yeah, that was one of the things that motivated me to write the essay. Was I remember my sister and a dear old friend and my sister's husband sitting at our kitchen table, and I was shocked, but I was just trying to be a good sister right then. But they were trying to come to terms with, our son is going to be on the streets and we're going to lose him that way, because that's where they were. And I didn't include that in the essay. But that's where they were. And I remember thinking, yeah, my brother's a psychiatrist. They have help upon help upon help. And that's where they were. So
Yeah.
It's very humbling.
Yeah. And there's an element, too, to the piece where you write schizophrenia is an illness of gating.
Yeah. I mean, I always wish there was like a Susan Sontag type figure writing about. I have kind of a hazy idea about, the way we live now is kind of textbook mental illness. If you look at older versions of the DSM and things, because our entire culture does not really allow for gating in terms of attentive focus. And then, things that would have been understood as breaks with reality, even not a whole generation ago, just half a generation ago, like my phone is listening to me. Mm-hmm. That would have been an absolute textbook break with reality. And our phones are listening to us. So there's some kind of huge question there about, which I think is also always true with illness. People who think about illness will sometimes say, oh, a society has the illness and certain people manifest it. I wonder about that with gating, but more specifically to your question, yeah, it's like, imagine you're in a restaurant and there's 200 people there. You're probably able to focus on the person at the table with you. And then when the waiter comes, you shift your focus to the waiter. And then when your phone rings, you shift your focus to your phone, back and forth with ease. So for my nephew, before he was treated, it was all on the same volume, plus the louder volume of what's happening in your head. So imagine, exhausting, right?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah, that really, I think, grounds it for people who maybe it's very abstract, like, oh, what could that possibly be like? But if you can imagine all that stimuli coupled with maybe the thing that's the loudest, which is in the head as well, that can be, it's just total nightmare.
Oh yeah, and it makes it, you realize you're an absolute hero to get up and like get dressed if the whole time you have just this nonstop barrage of noise, often very hateful noise. So yes, the smallest things suddenly seem very heroic. Yeah.
And I always love getting a sense of, the writing itself and for someone who works in different genres as well, what's the practice by which that you're writing and attacking a piece of work that you need to get words done. What do you like to have in place so you can get that done?
Sure. One thing that helps me a lot is I write in it was like a chicken coop from the 1920s. Nice. It's in my alley, and it helps me physically to walk out the gate. And then I actually can't access the internet there. So like when I'm working well, I draft there. It's a little deprivation chamber. And then I'm just it's probably not at all the most efficient way to write, but I'm a real sentence by sentence person, which also makes it hard when I need to be edited a lot. And I really write by ear. I usually don't take residencies, in part because I have small children at home, but I did go to Silver City, New Mexico, 2 falls ago, to the Power and Light residency, which was great. And I did do a big full draft of this there. Then I set it aside for a year.
And what do you identify as something that you struggle with when you sit down to write?
Oh, I'm glad you focused it just on writing, not just not just generally. Let's see. When I sit down to write, what do I struggle with? I don't struggle with a lack of ideas, to the point that it's maybe the opposite struggle, that I have to pare down and focus and eliminate things. My own organization makes a lot of sense to me, but when I'm working with a whole team like I did on this, I uploaded everything I had to, the cloud so everyone could see it. But I am aware that other people would do more obvious to other people forms of organization, and that would probably make life easier. Yeah, and I do definitely struggle with the business side of writing, for sure. That's probably my biggest struggle, actually.
Yeah. The business side of it is so. Yeah, talk about an ugly ball of yarn to untangle for a lot of people. It's like pieces that you might get to write for the Atavist, but then there's like maybe all this other kind of weird contract work or like a teaching gig here. It's like how writers cobble it together. I don't know how you do it.
I don't either. And I don't actually know that anybody knows, including all the people who are doing it, which, there's some comfort there. So
yeah, well, it's a little spur that coming off of just that little exchange is this kind of notion of ambition and maybe what success looked like 10 or 15 years ago, and maybe how you're defining it now. So, like for you, how do you wrestle with the ambitions that you want as a writer, and maybe what success looked like a decade ago versus how you view what it is now?
Yeah. I think it's a huge loss for the literary world that there aren't more just wage earning jobs. What happened with the Washington Post, of course, is a recent awful example of that. And I share the worry of many people that you then lose a lot of, for example, working class voices. One way that I have figured that out in my own life is I've always privileged time over money. So we live pretty simply.
Yeah.
And I will always, I think that's a classic artist preference. For me, it's huge. What else? I don't think too much. It doesn't help me that much. Like part of why I didn't like having a book on submission with like big 5 places and stuff was I don't like thinking too much about all of that stuff, but when I'm in the work, it's good. So it feels best to me to be deeply in the work and somewhat detached from the outcome of it.
Yeah, the outcome aspect of it is we're so attached to it, but that is so out of our control too. Like be it awards or grants or all these other metrics out there that we see on social media that we see other people seem to be like unilaterally crushing it. And then here we are, just, miring in our own mud. And we just like, it ends up making us feel so shitty about ourselves. And it makes it harder to do the work when we're like focusing or getting bombarded by everything else. It's just, how do you wall yourself off from that if you can at all?
Yeah. That's a good question. And I certainly I know a full gamut of writers, and I got my MFA at Iowa once upon a time, so I know everybody from people who are like stone cold geniuses that no one's ever heard of, and they're working like janitorial jobs at the Seattle Public Library or something, and you're like, oh, what a loss that we don't have that book. And I know people who've been extremely savvy and had like perfect timing and have won, all the beautiful awards. So there's like some peace and kind of humility in just realizing, yes, a lot of it is out of anyone's control. And then how do I deal with that? That's your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, like preserving interior quiet is huge. For writing, and I try to do that. And then I was raised like with an idea more of like one's vocation than one's profession, and that is liberating to me because it's not really about ego. It's not necessarily about a lot of different things that we use as markers. It's more just like everybody has the work that is theirs to do, and we all are more truly ourselves and therefore happier, among other things, if we're doing the work that is ours to do. Yeah. And then also you don't have to feel like when you do ring the bell, you don't have to feel proud either. It's just like, oh, I'm just doing the work that's mine to do.
Yeah. I'll never forget. This would have been 2016 or so. And so my first book came out in 2011 or whatever. That I'm just kind of setting the conditions of this little meandering anecdote. But I was working at so I had this book come out, and I'd have whatever publishing credits I had at the time. And so whatever, you seem you're on a certain track. And I've had any number of menial day jobs to help subsidize my writing habit over the years. And so, I'm at that time like stocking produce at Whole Foods areas, like narrative journalist and all this thing, MFA, college degree. And here I am stacking apples and shit like that. And I ran into someone who had like a friend I hadn't seen in a long time. Who had, he bought my first book. He was like, I was so excited. And then I see him, we make eye contact as I'm pushing the produce cart. And I'll never forget the kind of look on his face. Like, for one, he almost didn't recognize me. And then it's like, once he recognized me, I could almost see this look of pity on his face. Sure. And I was just and I could feel it too. I'm like, yeah, here I am, like stacking this produce and anything. It was just such a weird, awkward feeling. And you bringing up like maybe this person who's like janitor at a library who has the chops, but here they are doing this thing. And a few years ago, blanking on the actor's name who was on the Cosby Show, but like he was shamed for working at Trader Joe's like during a season where he wasn't getting a lot of work, and people were like, "Whoa, what a loser this guy is for being at Trader Joe's after having been on this massive hit in the 80s." He's just like, "What? No, this is just like how I patch in the holes between jobs." And it's just
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think writers, it's always comforting to talk to other writers too, because you said you were stacking apples, and I immediately had like the image, and I immediately thought, oh, cool, access to a whole world that I don't know about, and like what short story is going to come out of that, or what essay, or like what's the weird economy of like where they get those cool fish at Whole Foods. I just think of it as material.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, we have a number of friends who are attorneys, and to me, that's always a very striking contrast, because within that world, if you do the work and you're good at it, you just keep rising and rising. And next thing they know, they're giving you country club memberships and you're very rich. But yeah, it's not that way for writers, but how wonderful to go through the whole world where everything's material. And also, I mean, if they were knocking him for working at Trader Joe's, I just, we are like ruled by all these crooks right now who couldn't work an honest job to save their lives. Right. And I'm like, that's an honest job. And like getting people groceries is an honorable thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like talking about this too, because I think there are legions of writers out there who feel shame that they might have maybe just a day job or an hourly wage job that is certainly not something that they're proud of or tweeting about. And it makes them feel less than, that their vocation isn't the thing that's paying the bills in a way that is satisfactory, that we can say, yes, like my writing is paying my bills. Think another landscaping gig I had. I remember during my lunch break, I was like doing reporting calls, like for a feature I was writing. It's just one of these things, like you make it work if it's something you desperately want to or need to do. And, if you have this other job that's not in any way related to the thing, maybe to your point, it's all material in some capacity. And it's making you interface with the world in a way that writers need to interface with the world. And what better way to maybe do that than like a grocery store or some retail position?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I kind of think the whole MFA system should be reimagined, and there should be a lot more MFAs where you end and you have like an electrician's license in addition to your MFA, or like a plumber's license. And because I love to teach, and I've taught many different places, and I've definitely been academia adjacent like a ton of artists. But I do think there's probably a loss too, that we don't have more landscapers writing, and we don't have more grocery stockers writing.
Yeah. Well, Mia, this is so great to have this really kind of wide-ranging conversation about what it means to go about the work, and this wonderful piece you did for the Atavist.
Thank you.
And as I bring these conversations down for a landing, I always just love asking the guests, you in this case, for a fun recommendation for the listeners. And that's just anything you're excited about that you want to share with the listeners that might bring them a little modicum of joy in their lives.
Oh, sure. Sweet potatoes. The fiction of Miriam Teves, the fiction of Lucia Berlin, Dairy Girls, the show, Night of the Hunter. That's like such a film for our day. Hanging around children, hanging around inmates. I'm loving hanging around the inmates. I know that's a good bunch, right?
Oh, fantastic. Awesome. And yeah, that's wonderful. So yeah, this piece for The Atavist is incredible. And I'm so glad that people have already gotten a chance to read it. And I hope far more will pick it up and learn a thing or two. So thank you so much, Mia, for the work and for coming on the show.
Thank you. And thank you for what you do.
Yes. Awesome. Thanks to Mia and Seyward for coming on the show. Always fun to have these Atavistian pods. They have a different flavor. Good flavor. A good one. Be sure to visit magazine.atavist.com to check out Mia's story and consider subscribing. I pay. It's only $25 a year. I don't get kickbacks or a comp subscription. I'm of the people, man. Thanks to the Power of Narrative Conference for promotional support. Don't forget to use that Narrative 20 code at checkout for a discount on your tuition. Visit combeyond.bu.edu to learn more. For more information about the CNF Pod Expanded Universe, head over to brendanomero.com. Hey. Follow on Instagram at Creative Nonfiction Podcast. And maybe you'll join Pitch Club to learn how to write and sell better pitches. All right, so this parting shot, I might turn this into a vlog for the YouTubes. This American life. Get it? I only submitted the frontrunner to one award, mainly because that shit gets expensive. I had to submit 3 hardback copies of the book, plus $50 for the Oregon Book Award. I think it was 3. It could have been up to 5, but I think it was 3 copies. You know, that from my stash, of course. I don't even know what awards are available for sports biographies or biographies in general, so I didn't submit anywhere else. If you think your publisher will do this, they won't. You know, their job's to publish the book. Full stop. Maybe you can ask, but I figured that would have been silly. Anyway, I know that Literary Arts in Portland received my submission because I got a receipt thanking me for my payment. Whether they read the books or not, I don't know. I guess you just have to trust them, which I don't, but whatever. And given my book's topic, you know, the magnitude of its anniversary, the 50th anniversary of Steve Prefontaine's death, and the fact that it is such an Oregon book, I felt confident that I'd be a finalist in general nonfiction. Yeah, it's such an Oregon book and an Oregon story. And the subject matter of the book doesn't have to be Oregonian nature to be eligible for the Oregon Book Award. It just has to be an Oregonian, an author. So I got wind through someone on Instagram that the finalists were announced and the front runner did not make the cut. I was gutted. Like, I'm not going to lie, I was gutted. I boarded the bullet train to Bummerville, man. I wanted to get shit-faced. But instead I made a collage. You know, and there's growth there, I guess. Still gutted, though. Listen, I understand as well as anybody that awards are largely bullshit and political. The wise Ron Swanson said as much in Parks and Recreation. We shouldn't give a shit about them at all. But we'd be lying if we said we didn't. You know, we want to be seen. We want our work to matter to the gatekeepers. We want to be able to show off to our larger communities that, yes, we have worthiness that is seen by others and deemed by others to be worthy. Mainly because there's so little gold at the end of the rainbow, just getting some measure of recognition makes all the pain and waiting and longing feel worth it. You know, few of us are going to sell thousands of copies and shoot up bestseller lists and have prominent writers and influencer types share photos of our books to their Instagram stories. You know, these little grace notes of status that we can reshare. It's an outcome-driven thing, and damn it, we want good outcomes. You know, we can pay lip service to the journey being the reward, and to stay sane, it kind of has to be. But we want to be recognized and lauded. You know, we want the trophy because we sink so much into these damn things. It's like the damn Olympics. You train for 4 years for this 2-week window. You know, that's not unlike book writing, and few of us are ever going to medal. But I suppose getting there is a win in and of itself. And I'll never forget this anecdote from Amy Poehler's book, Yes, Please. They expected to win an Emmy for Parks and Recreation for this particular season, and they didn't. Yeah, they were gutted too. But Michael Schur, the brilliant Michael Schur, showrunner, executive producer, blah, 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 turned that energy and bitterness and guttedness into the writing and wrote Ben and Leslie's proposal scene for the following season. And it's a magical moment in the series. He turned his disappointment into a tailwind and controlled what he can control. And that's really the lesson. You know, these things matter, but they don't. They're nice, but hinging our expectations and our worth on these results-driven metrics, these subjective kind of metrics, will drive us insane. There are factors at play that make no sense to us, that we're in the dark about. I mean, hell, I don't even know if the judges, read my book. I don't even know if they received the book. But like I said, I know they were happy to take my credit card payment. But I will say one thing. Omar El Akkad, the author of One Day Everyone Will Have Been Against This, who lives in Oregon, who won the National Book Award, was not named a finalist for the Oregon Book Award. Hey, maybe he didn't submit, but I'll assume he did because he's won it before for fiction. And if the guy who won the kind of biggest book award in the country couldn't be a finalist in Oregon, I'll tell you what, it made me feel a whole lot better. So stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do interviews, see ya.